Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be making deflector shields. Let's get started. All right, let's do this. I'm going to hit A to select all, X to delete, and I'm going to go Shift A, UV sphere, scale it up, not that big. And this is going to be our deflector shield. I'm going to right click Shade Smooth, and why not? Let's just put a subdivision surface on it, just so it's super smooth. And we're going to split our view. Now we're going to build this so it works in Eevee and in cycles. So we'll stick with Eevee for now. We'll turn on ambient occlusion. Actually, we won't need ambient occlusion. We'll keep it on just in case we end up with multiple geometry bits. Bloom and screen space reflections, just so that it's all there. And then let's go over here. We're going to switch this over to the shader editor. First thing we need to do is we need to set up transparency so that this object can be transparent. So I'm going to open up my side panel here and I'm going to come down to options, and you get blend mode and shadow mode, and I'm going to switch this from opaque to alpha. I'll go with alpha hash for now on both of these. Let's first get the overall look for what this deflector shield should be. So let's grab a color ramp. And we'll grab a noise, not white noise, sorry, noise texture. And we could put some kind of pattern into this deflector shield. Could be kind of cool actually. If we grab the Voronoi texture, we can get some really neat patterns out of that. So it might be worth it for us to try it with Voronoi first. Let's switch it to Chebychev. And I'm going to take my distance and put it into my factor, and I'll take my color, and instead of going into base color, I'm going to go into emission because I want my shield to glow, really brightly. I might switch this. I'll keep it F1 for now. Basically, the way this is going to work is we're going to have something that drives a texture pattern, right? And this texture pattern is going to be something that can play out through the entire shield. So if you want some kind of pattern, like if we turn this down, right, we get this really nice ringed pattern. This could be, what appears as something gets close. We could also go for just a noise pattern like this, which the noise texture generates nicely. And this could be just as cool. We can turn up our distortion. Like this kind of creates a nice sun pattern, like a sunspot pattern. And this could be good as well. So there's a lot of styles that you could approach this with. Now the next thing I want to do is get the basics. We'll just as a footnote, we'll leave this off to the side for now. Okay, so we've got our texture. This is going to be something we can play with. Next, let's build out the proximity detection. So how do we know when something's gotten close to the object and we want to activate the shield? Okay, so to do that, I'm going to create an empty. So let's grab my empty plain access, and it's going to put it right here in the center of my scene. I'll grab it on the Y and just drag it off. Doesn't matter where it is, but stick it anywhere really. And I'm going to grab a new node called the object info node. Sorry, not the object info node, the texture coordinate node. So if I grab the texture coordinate node, one of the great features of the texture coordinate node is that it gives us this here, this ability to select an object and use information from that object. So we can select our empty, and now with that empty in there, if we use the object coordinate, it's going to give us information about this object. Mainly gives us the location of it. So it will change the color of the surface of our shader based on how far away the surface is from this point, wherever this thing is. And as this moves, it changes the material. So if you want to see what it looks like directly, you can just plug this into the emission, and you can see that as we move our object, the colors which are representing the coordinates, so the position of our surface to this object will change. And we can use that to do cool things. So we're going to use that to drive something that will mask away our deflector shield. So I'm going to create, let's go for a gradient texture node. Gradient texture node is really useful for creating mattes and stuff. And what I'd like to do is switch it to spherical. So this will create a sphere in 3D space that is a gradient from white to black. So at the center of our sphere, it's going to be white and it's going to fade off to black. Now, what we need to do is we're going to take our object coordinate and we're going to plug it into the vector of our texture or gradient texture. And then I'm just going to plug this factor into the emission so we can have a look at it. Now I'll grab my empty and I'll bring it close. And as you can see, as we get close to the object, we start to get this gradient. So visualize, like picture for yourself this, here I'll show you. So see this sphere, right? This is what the gradient texture node's doing. It's basically creating a sphere like this within this texture space. And it's staying wherever this empty is, okay? So wherever the empty goes, that sphere goes. And that sphere is the exact same size as our empty. So it's taking the position and the scale of this empty and it's creating a gradient basically around it. So when this empty intersects the bigger sphere here, so if I grab these together, it's going to intersect and it's going to create a circle right around the point and where it intersects. And that circle will get smaller as it, you know, intersects less. We're just get a tiny circle where it intersects right at the main, you know, the diameter right at the thickest point. You're going to get a large white circle, and then as it moves further in, that circle is going to get smaller as this sphere moves through it. So kind of picture it like that in your head when you see it. So if you watch, we'll just go through and you can see as it gets bigger and gets smaller, that's what's going on. Now that means we can change the size with the scale. So we can scale up this empty to change the size of this thing, and we can move it around. So this is what we'll use to detect when something hits the shield. So now let's combine all this together. So how would you use something like this to then mat out the other texture that we're going to use, right? And the rest of the image, you know. So I'm going to take this factor and I will plug it into the alpha. Now we're going to get a combination of the two. So you can see our shield is now invisible until we get this object coming close. Now let's come up with a really cool look for our deflector shield. I'm going to switch my background to black just so I can, you know, view this as if I'm in space. I'm also going to get rid of my grid because it's a little distracting. Turn off my axis and I'll turn off my floor. I might even let's create a reroute node. And I'm going to drop it right here. And this reroute node we can use to kind of set up easily. We can change out the texture once we get going. So let's switch this. Let's go to like a blue deflector shield. And instead of black, maybe we could take this to another shade of blue, something like that. That's kind of cool. Now, one thing that we need with a deflector shield is, you know, when it hits, it's not just like this, right? It needs to glow, like it needs to really get bright. And when you're using a color ramp, if you open this up and you look at what these values are, if we go to RGB, you can see that they max out at 1. So full blue is 1, right? And 1, when you plug it into emission, is a level of brightness that's just kind of, it's like an even level of brightness where it's not bright enough to really trigger bloom. If I come over to my render settings and open up bloom, you can see that it's a little bit enough. So the threshold's 0.8, so anything over 0.8. So we're getting a tiny bit of bloom from this, but not a lot. If you really want bloom to start kicking in, you need to push values above 1. Now, how do you do that when you've got a color ramp, right? And you don't want to miss out, you don't want to remove the color, you want to keep this color. There's a couple of ways. One, you can actually go over to the HSV, which stands for hue, saturation, and vibrancy. And if you change the vibrancy, which is basically the brightness, it doesn't affect the color, like it stays the same color, it just darkens it or brightens it. You could turn this up past 1 by clicking on it and typing in a number. So we could go to 2 or 3 or even 5. So you can keep pushing it this way until you get the right level of bloom. Another way of doing it, take this back to 1, is to use a vector math node. And the reason why I use a vector math and not a normal math node is because a vector is a set of 3 numbers, or any set of numbers, to be honest. Not the physics definition. Don't get confused. Physics, you know, a vector is it's got direction, and it's a point with direction, and like velocity and speed, all that stuff. I'm not big on physics, but math, a vector can just be a set of numbers, right? In representing a point in 3D space. So it's slightly different. And anyway, so if we set this to multiply, and I'll just grab a value node so I don't have to enter in a number 3 times because I want it to be the same number. I'll plug this in here. Now what we can do is we can multiply it, right? And this will allow us to go into super bright territory as well. So that's kind of nice if you want it as like a separate control, like you kind of manage your color and then you can come over here and turn up your brightness. All right, now another thing that we want is this gradient circle. It's a bit too bright for me, actually. I'll turn this down to like 10. It's just a bit too perfect, you know, this little gradient circle that we've got. doesn't really work for me, right? I want to make some more variation in this. So I'm going to break up my gradient. Now, the easiest way to do that is to affect the texture coordinate. Because remember, this texture coordinate, like this is what's creating this sphere. So if I start introducing some new values into this chain right here before it gets to the gradient texture, then it's going to slowly affect where it's placing this sphere. And if, you know, think about it into when you're working texture coordinates, the information that's coming out of this node, it's not like giving us one point and this is where to put this sphere gradient, you know? It's actually giving the location of every single pixel for this gradient texture, right? So this is creating, in a sense, creating, you know, it's telling where to put that whole sphere. That's the best way to say it. If I start mixing in some noise into this, it's going to begin to not just move the sphere in different places, but it actually will affect the exterior of that sphere. So if I go for a mix RGB and a noise texture, I can grab this and we'll drop this in here, and I'll put my factor into the color, and I'll just turn it all the way off to start with. Well, you can see the effect there. If I turn it all the way off and then hold down Shift and slowly drag, you'll start to see how it affects it. So you can see it's moving and distorting this sphere. If I turn my scale up, it will break it up even further, like that. So that's cool. Now this is something where we could also use a pattern, right? So we could also use the same, there's no reason why I can't use the same like noise texture, right, that we're using to generate this image. In fact, that's probably a good idea. So we should take this and plug it in here from our reroute node. That way, you know, we can easily just plug in something different. So if I plugged this in, we can see what this would look like. So that's pretty cool, right? Giving us this like geometric pattern. It needs to react to what's being thrown at it. I could probably do that, right? If we switch from 3D to 4D, gives us this one extra input value, which is the W value. And this allows us to kind of evolve the image. So if I hold down Shift and drag, you can see it moves. Probably what would be ideal would be to actually take this, right? And let's type in pound and then frame. And that's the shortcut to creating a driver. So we've just created a driver. You know you have a driver if it's purple. That's the color code in Blender for a driver. So if we've got a driver now that's taking the frame number, and so every frame, this thing is going to change, right? So it's changing at a crazy rate. We could probably slow it down. So let's go like multiply it by 0.1. Let's go even further, 0.01. Even further, 0.01. There we go. Now it's just kind of evolving. Let's try color ramp. Now I could switch this to something like B-spline, which is going to really, really gradual follow. That's kind of cool, getting two layers, it feels like, of intensity. Let's bring in slave one. All right, so we got slave one in here that we've been working on, and let's put it so that it's kind of around it. And then let's change the shape of it. So I'll scale it on the X and rotate it, kind of get it to fit. You can kind of see how that works, right? Because like you're gonna have like these blast things kind of happen quickly, right? Boom, 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 boom. And you can use this empty to control that. So you can have like a laser blast, like, you know, coming in, and then you can animate this to coincide with it. So you get that ripple effect. Let's try and let's back off this scale of this noise a bit. We could mix these. So we could go for a mix RGB and drop that right into here. And take this one, try multiplying these together, see how it looks. And now those combined, you can see we're getting this cool kind of mechanical pattern. So in order to create like a rippled system, right? So as this thing gets closer, boom, we get this kind of ripple effect. What we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need to use this system right here that we're using to drive our alpha. So I'm gonna take it and duplicate it. Bring it right down here. And I'm going to grab the same thing that I'm grabbing here. It's my factor. I want it to match this. And I'm going to take a look at it. So I'm actually going to come over here. If you've got Node Wrangler turned on, you can just hotkey it, but I don't at the moment. So I'm just going to do it manually. Plug this into the surface. let's not use all this. Let's take the object coordinate and we'll just pop it in straight there. So we just have a gradient. Then what we can do is we can grab a vector math node, or even just, we don't even need a vector math node. We just need a math node. And we can set this to sine. Drop it here. And then what we can do is we can grab a, let's see, a math node here, put it in before, and multiply. We can turn it up, and we're going to start to get these like cool rings, although they're not going to be even if we're doing it with a gradient node like this. So what I should do is switch this to ease, and that will give us an equal gradient. Now wherever this goes, we're going to have this ripple gradient, and as this thing moves through it, you can see they're going to kind of move and adjust, right? So again, we've got our texture coordinate with the empty piped into a gradient node set to spherical, and we got our color ramp set to ease, and the black and white is just dragged all the way out. And what this is doing is, you know, if you look at this in its steps, if we look at this, right? So it creates this even gradient from the point here. And then if we take the multiplying math node, we're basically multiplying right at the moment by 84.5, this number. So all these numbers go really, really high. And then we pop it into a sine function. And what that does is it's going to make everything fluctuate between 0 and 1, or -1 and 1. And so by multiplying this thing really high, because at the moment right here, at this point, it's just 0 and 1, this gradient, right? So by multiplying it up to 84, it's now 84 and 0. So it's really big. So now everything above 1 here is going to start to continue to do that sine wave function. So it's going to just fluctuate from -1 to 1 all the way up until it reaches 84.5, whatever. So that's how we get multiple rings, by doing it this way. Whereas if it's just 1, it's going to look exactly the same. If we multiply by 2, getting a little bit of difference, but you can see as we start to increase that number, you get more of these. So we can do this out for a little ways till we get enough ripples. And then what we can do is we can subtract a value from it in order to get them to move. So I can just come right here, and I think it's here we do it just before. So I hit subtract, and yeah, that's going to do it. Except we are going to get, everything's going to go like that, which might not be a problem for how we're using it. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to do another driver. So frame times -0.001. That's way too small, so that's also way too small. 0.1. That's also too small. Let's just do -1. So we can go negative. Yeah, we do need to go a little smaller than that. So 0.5. No. Oh, sorry. 0.5. I don't want 0.5. Just 5. 0.5. Yeah. Cool. Now what I can do is I can use this to drive a bump node. So I can come over here and grab a bump and drop it right here. And then I can take this output, put it into the height, and take this normal and put it into the normal. And now if we come up here and have a look at this guy. Now I can take this and I can take the strength down and the distance. Just kind of adjust it a little bit so it's not too intense. Now you can see we're going to get this kind of cool ripple effect. Awesome. So there we go. Deflector shield. So now if I took an object, right, let's say mesh cylinder, let's grab my empty, cursor to selected, grab that cylinder that we just created, selection cursor, scale it down, scale Z. Create a new material for this guy, make it an emission material, turn it red, turn it right up so it glows, and just parent it to this null. You can see now we've got this cool laser thing. Now what you might want to do is, like, for example, right, in this case, where we've got a laser, right, that comes in, when it hits the shield, you actually want the laser to disappear, right? So you could do a similar thing in this shader, right, for your lasers, where whenever they are close to this object, they start to disappear. So we can come over to this thing, use a gradient node again, right? Gradient texture, set it to spherical, and then use a texture coordinate. Grab, instead of the empty this time, we want to grab the sphere, our shield object, and then we can use that object as the coordinate factor. And then what we could do is we could say maybe create a transparent BSDF shader, and then do a mix shader, drop these two together, and then use this as the factor. We have to invert it, possibly. Now, to make this a little bit easier to figure out, what we can do is we can go Shift A, create a plane, scale it up, rotate X 90, and just get it in position so it's intersecting our shield. And then we're gonna put the same material on it. So I'm gonna come down here, find my glowy laser material. So we've got our texture coordinate with the sphere, our shield, in the object, and we've got the object coordinate going into a spherical gradient texture and using that as the factor. But you can see what it's doing is it's making this outer bit really glowy and the inner bit not so glowy, but it's not quite the right effect. So we need to kind of push the numbers a bit further. So what we can do is go for a map range node, and we can drop that here. And then what we can do is we can just play with these numbers until we cut out the section that we don't want. So we get rid of the glow from there. So remember, because we're using a transparent BSDF, we need to also make sure that we've got alpha hashed or blend turned on. So I'm going to switch this to alpha hash. Don't have to worry about a shadow. So anyways, now that's going to work. So what we can do is we can take this plane, we can delete it. And now you see we grab our empty, we can drag it in, and as that laser intersects the shield, it's going to disappear. It will reappear though when you come out the other side, so we just have to animate that a bit custom to get that to work properly. Now, one thing that's also pretty important here is if you notice we're on the inside kind of from behind looking at it, and we can't see the shield effect. That's because we're using alpha blend. So that's what I said before, you can't like see through things. So we need to go alpha hashed in order to get this to work properly. So we also don't need shadows for the shield. The shield's not going to cast shadows. So we can turn that to none just to save on power. But now you can see I can come around the other side and I can make that work. So I hope you found this tutorial really helpful and educational, and you learned a few cool tricks that you can use in your own projects now. Don't forget to check out the Patreon. You can get hold of this project file over there, along with a lot of other great stuff, as well as the full uncut live stream. So if you want to watch the full live stream of this, take a lot of detours. We tried a lot of different things that didn't necessarily end up in the tutorial. So you can check that out if you head over to Patreon or join here on YouTube at the All Access Pass level and higher. So thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next tutorial. Until then, have a fantastic week. See ya. Bye. All right, that was just for the recording.